The town of Harlan Creek, Wyoming had made up its mind about Clara Voss the same way small towns make up their minds about anyone who doesn't fit the shape they've prepared slowly, collectively, and with the absolute confidence of people who have never once questioned their own measurements. It started when she was 14 and corrected the general store's ledger in front of her father and 3 other men, pointing out an accounting error that had gone unnoticed for 2 years. The storekeeper had thanked her father. Clara had stood there and understood something about how the world worked that took some people a lifetime to learn. By the time she was 26, the understanding had deepened considerably. Clara Voss ran the Harlan Creek telegraph office, had run it for 5 years since the previous operator, a man named Dewhurst, had gone to Denver for a surgery that didn't take. She had learned the position from Dewhurst himself in the last year of his health, sitting beside him for hours while he tapped and translated and explained. Because Clara had understood immediately that this was useful knowledge, and useful knowledge was the only kind worth having. She was precise, fast, and could receive a 40-word message without a single error at a speed that the regional superintendent, who had tested her twice, had described in writing as remarkable. She was also unmarried, which Harlan Creek had a great deal to say about. Not that the town disliked her. That was the particular texture of the problem. They liked her fine. They respected the telegraph office, relied on the telegraph office, would have been genuinely lost without the telegraph office. What they couldn't accommodate was the combination of Clara and the telegraph office. The fact that she ran it with the kind of authority that made people forget, briefly, that she was a woman, and then remember, and then feel vaguely unsettled by the forgetting. She was not, by the frontier standards of 1878, what anyone would call difficult to look at. Dark hair she kept braided and pinned with the efficiency of someone whose hands needed to be free. Gray eyes that people described, when pressed, as direct. A face that was, as her mother had once said, with the combination of affection and mild warning that mothers deploy, the kind of face that makes men feel they've been understood before they've spoken, which some men find wonderful and some men find threatening. And the trick, her mother had said, was finding one of the first kind. Clara had been looking. She was not, as the town seemed to believe, indifferent to the idea of a husband. She was indifferent to the idea of the wrong husband, which was a different thing entirely, and one that Harlan Creek could not seem to hold as a distinction. There had been Albright, the land assessor, who had told her over dinner at the Callaway Hotel that he imagined it must be difficult doing a man's work. She had thanked him for dinner and walked home, and not thought about him again, except occasionally as an example. There had been Peterson, who ran the grain operation east of town, a decent man with a good operation and absolutely nothing to say that required her full attention. She had declined his proposal on a Tuesday afternoon, and he had accepted the decision with good grace, which she respected, and the town had used it as evidence of her impossibility for approximately 6 months. The town's consensus, assembled the way consensus always is in places with too much time and too little news, was that Clara Voss was too sharp for any man to get comfortable around, too settled in her own way of doing things, too certain. The word they used most often was particular, which they meant as a criticism and which Clara received as a description. She had her own word for what she was. She was waiting for someone worth the wait. She had stopped expecting to find him in Harlan Creek. She was wrong. He arrived on the stage from Cheyenne on a Tuesday in April, when the Wyoming spring was doing what Wyoming spring did, which was threaten warmth and then deliver cold, so the morning was bright and the afternoon was spitting sleet, and the stage was 40 minutes late. His name was John Marsh. He had come to Harlan Creek because the Federal Land Survey Office had sent him to complete the mapping of the territory north of the Wind River Range, a project that would take, by his estimate, the better part of 5 months. He was a surveyor by training and by inclination, 34 years old, with the particular economy of movement that belongs to men who have spent years working in conditions where wasted effort has real consequences. He came to the telegraph office the morning after he arrived because he needed to send a message to the survey office in Cheyenne confirming his arrival and establishing the reporting schedule for the coming months. This was a practical matter. He pushed open the office door at 8:30. Clara was at the instrument. She did not look up immediately because she was in the middle of a transmission and she finished it before she did anything else. He had time to observe the office clean, organized. The kind of order that isn't performed but simply maintained as the natural state of things, and the woman running it, who tapped the key with the focused attention of someone for whom the work is interesting and not merely a job. She finished. She looked up. "Morning," she said. "What can I do for you?" "I need to send a message to Cheyenne." He came to the counter. "Survey office. Confirmation of arrival and a schedule request." "What's the schedule?" "Weekly reports. Tuesdays, unless something requires immediate contact." She had already pulled the message form. "Your name for the sender line." "John Marsh. Federal Land Survey." She wrote it without looking at the form, her eyes on him with the assessing quality of someone cataloging information they intend to use. "How long are you in Harlan Creek?" "Through September, most likely." "That's a long survey. It's a large territory." She looked at the message he'd written on the slip of paper he'd prepared. Her eyes moved across it quickly. "This is well written," she said, with the directness of someone who notices things and sees no reason to keep the noticing to herself. "Most people give me something that takes 3 attempts to decode." He looked at her with an expression that was, she thought, closer to amusement than surprise. "I've sent a few messages. It shows." She turned to the instrument. The transmission took 90 seconds. She was fast, he noticed. "Confirmation will come through by this afternoon," she said. "You can pick it up then, or I can hold it." "I'll come back," he said. Then, because he was not a man who said things he didn't mean, "Thank you, that was efficient." "That's the idea," Clara said. He left. Clara returned to the instrument. The morning transmission schedule continued. She thought about him precisely as much as was reasonable, which was briefly, and then set the thought aside. He came back at 3 in the afternoon. The confirmation had arrived. She handed it over. He read it, folded it, looked at her. "The woman at the hotel," he said, "told me to eat at a place called Dunnigan's." "She's right," Clara said. "It's on the east end of Main Street." "She also told me," he said, with the careful neutrality of a man sharing information he has already decided what to think about, "that you've been running this office for 5 years, and that the regional office tried to replace you with a man from Laramie last year, and you outscored him on every measure they tested." Clara regarded him. "The hotel owner talks a great deal." "She does," he agreed. "Is it true?" "Yes." "What did they do?" "Kept me," Clara said. "They didn't have much choice." The scores were documented. John Marsh looked at her for a moment with the amber eyes that were, she was noting whether she wanted to or not, the color of good whiskey, and entirely steady. "Good," he said. She had not expected that. A slight adjustment in her expression, barely anything, but he saw it. "Good night, Miss Voss," he said, and left. Clara sat with that for a moment longer than she intended. The town noticed. Small towns notice everything. And Harlan Creek had been noticing Clara Voss for long enough that any variation in the pattern was of immediate interest. By the end of the first week, it was known that the federal surveyor came to the telegraph office more often than his transmission schedule required. By the end of the second week, it was known that he had been seen walking with Clara on the post road on a Thursday evening, which was unusual because Clara had not been seen walking with anyone in longer than people could reliably remember. By the end of the third week, the town had settled into the familiar posture of collective concern that it deployed whenever Clara Voss seemed close to something the town had decided she would ruin. It was Frances Albright, the assessor's wife, and therefore possessed of a particular investment in Clara's continued failure at connection, who spoke most plainly. She said it to Marsh directly. On a Saturday morning outside the dry goods store, in the way that frontier women of a certain confidence sometimes said things directly, when indirectness seemed insufficient. "I don't know how much time you've spent with Clara Voss," Frances said, with the manner of someone delivering a public service. "But I'll tell you what I know about her. She has turned down 2 decent men in this town. She has opinions about everything, and she'll tell you so without being asked. She runs that office like it belongs to her, which I suppose it does in a way, but you know what I mean. She's not," Frances paused, searching. "She's not easy," she settled on. John Marsh looked at Frances Albright, with the calm expression of a man who has been in the field long enough to recognize when information is being offered in someone else's interest rather than his own. "I appreciate that," he said. "She'll wear you out," Francis added. "I've surveyed the Wind River Range in November," Marsh said pleasantly. "I have some experience with challenging conditions." He tipped his hat. "Morning, Mrs. Albright." Francis watched him walk away with the dissatisfied expression of a person whose advice has landed wrong. That same afternoon, Marsh stopped by the telegraph office at closing time. Clara was locking the instrument case, the end-of-day routine that she did with the precise sequence of someone whose habits are practical and not performative. She looked up when the door opened. "I don't have a message to send," he said. "I know," she said. "Tuesday is your scheduled day. I thought we could walk." He said it the way he said most things, simply, without elaborate preparation. "There's a ridge south of town. I was up there this week for the survey markers. There's something worth seeing." Clara looked at him. She would acknowledge to herself honestly, hoping he would come by. She would not have acknowledged this to anyone else. "What kind of something?" "The kind you'd have to see to describe accurately," he said. "I'm a surveyor. I work in measurements. Trust the measurement." She almost smiled. "Give me 5 minutes." The ridge was a 20-minute walk south, where the land lifted out of the creek basin and opened into the wider territory, and the view from the top took in the full sweep of the valley in the late afternoon light, with the Wind River peak still carrying snow on the far horizon, and the sky doing what Wyoming skies did with space and color in a way that was simply not reducible to description. They stood at the top, and Clara looked at it and didn't say anything for a moment, because it didn't require anything said. "You were right," she said finally. "About the view," he said. "That's what I said." "I'm right about other things too," he said. The tone was even, not boastful, a statement of observed fact. "That confidence must be useful in your line of work," she said. "It's useful in most lines," he said. "The trick is making sure it's earned." She looked at him. "And is it?" "About some things," he said. "About this." He meant the view, but the word had more range than that, and she heard the range. "Yes." They walked back toward town in the cooling early evening. And the conversation went the way it had gone the other 2 times they'd walked together, which was easily and at length and without the particular strain of 2 people managing each other's impressions. She told him about the night 6 months ago when a storm had knocked the line down between Harlan Creek and the relay station at Pinedale, and she had ridden 12 miles through the dark to find the break and splice it because there was the message coming through from the territorial governor's office that couldn't wait for morning. He listened the way people listen when they are genuinely interested and not simply waiting to speak. "Did you ride alone?" he asked. "I did. 12 miles. Night. Storm." The message was urgent. He was quiet for a moment. "Did anyone in town know you'd gone?" "Not until I came back." He made a sound that was somewhere between recognition and something more complicated. "What did they say?" "That it was foolish," Clara said, "and that I should have woken someone to go with me." "Instead of," he said. "Instead of solving the problem myself in the time it would have taken to wake someone and explain the problem to them." Marsh looked at the road ahead of them. "They called it foolish," he said. "They did. What would they call it if a man had done it?" Clara glanced at him sideways. "I think you know the answer to that." "I do," he said. "I wanted to know if you did." "I've known for a long time," she said. There was no bitterness in it. It was simply a truth she had organized her life around. He heard the organizing. The conversation that followed was the one they had both been working toward without naming it. It came in the comfortable dark of the post road, the lights of Harlan Creek visible a quarter mile ahead, the cold settling in with the particular clarity of Wyoming spring nights. "People have been talking to you," Clara said. "About me?" "Yes," he said. He had found long ago that honesty was the only navigational tool he trusted. "What do they say?" "That you're too settled in your own way of doing things," he said. "Too certain. Too particular." She kept walking. "And you find that?" He stopped. She stopped. He turned and looked at her in the last of the light, with the full attention of a man who takes accurate measurements for a living and has applied that habit to this. I find, he said, that every quality they've described as a flaw is a quality I've been looking for in a person for the better part of 15 years and haven't found. He paused. I've worked with men who had no certainty and no particular standards, and the work they produced reflected it. What you're being criticized for is the same thing that kept that governor's message from going unanswered. The same thing that scored higher than the man from Laramie on every measure they tested. The town is reading the evidence wrong. Clara looked at him. The gray eyes were direct and entirely still. That's a considered opinion, she said, for someone who's known me less than a month. I'm a surveyor, he said. I know how to read terrain. I don't need 6 months to know what I'm looking at. She held his gaze for a long moment in the Wyoming dark. All right, she said. It was quiet. But it was the kind of quiet that contains everything. May came, and with it the warming of the territory and the lengthening of the survey work into longer days, and Marsh rode out most mornings before 7 and returned in the early evening, and somewhere between the riding out and the returning he made a habit of the telegraph office in the way that a man makes a habit of the things that are becoming necessary to him. He had Tuesdays for transmissions. He found other reasons for the other days. Clara did not examine the reasons too closely because the reasons were transparent, and she did not object to what was transparent. The town continued to observe. Mrs. Calloway at the dry goods counter said she had never seen Clara Voss look easy, which she meant as a statement about Clara's general manner, and which was, in context, the highest compliment she was capable of delivering. Marsh's landlady at the hotel told 3 separate people that the surveyor was steady in a way she recognized, the way you recognize good timber by its resistance to pressure. On a Wednesday morning in late May, Marsh arrived at the telegraph office at 7, which was 30 minutes before Clara usually opened, and she came down the outside stairs from the apartment above and found him waiting with his horse and a second horse, a sturdy brown mare with a kind eye and a calm way of standing. I'm not due to transmit until tomorrow, Clara said. I know. He looked at the mare. Her name is Alice. She belongs to the survey team's handler. She's the most reliable horse in our string. He paused. She's also the right size. Clara had not ridden in 2 years. The last time had been an unpleasantness involving a hired horse from the livery that had been, according to its owner, too lively for a woman working alone, a remark that had been made in front of others and accepted as humor by the others and filed by Clara under the long list of things she did not intend to repeat. She looked at Alice. I thought you might want to see the upper survey markers, Marsh said. The ones at 4,000 feet. The view is different from the ridge. It's worth the ride. He looked at her. But only if you want. There was no performance in it. He was not pressing. He was offering, with the directness of a man who does not dress up what he means. How long a ride? She said. 1.5 hours up, hour down in good weather. Clara looked at Alice again. The mare looked back with the settled patience of an animal that has been handled well and knows it. Broad back, deep chest. A horse that was built for the work, not arranged for appearance. She's not the prettiest, Marsh offered, but she's absolutely sound. I checked the tack myself this morning. Clara walked to the mare. She put her hand on the horse's neck. Alice stood without moving, easy and unbothered, the way that well-made things are unbothered by use. Clara put her foot in the stirrup. She swung up. Alice took her weight with the complete indifference of an animal that has been designed for exactly this and knows it, settling under her with a steadiness that Clara felt from the ground up. She sat in the saddle and felt the height of it, the solid ground contact of a horse that fit. And she breathed in the May morning and looked down at Marsh, who was looking up at her with the expression she had been cataloging over the past weeks, the one that was satisfaction and something warmer, something that didn't perform itself but simply was. Well, she said. Well, he said. He was not triumphant. He was simply pleased, in the way a person is pleased when something goes the way it ought to. She fits, Clara said. She does, he said. I thought she would. He swung up on his own horse and they rode south out of Harlan Creek in the early morning, past the edge of town where the road became trail, and the trail lifted toward the territory beyond. and Clara rode Alice with the ease of someone reclaiming something her body had never fully released, and the Wyoming spring opened up around them with the particular extravagance of altitude and light. The upper markers were at a height where the wind was constant, and the view went on beyond reckoning in 3 directions. The valley laid out below them, like a map, and the mountains past it, and the sky above it, enormous and entirely indifferent to the smallness of everything beneath it. They stopped their horses at the final marker and looked at it. "You were right," Clara said. "About the view." "That's what I keep saying." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the territory spread below him with the assessing eye of a man whose profession is to understand land accurately. "Clara," she looked at him. "I am going to be in Harlan Creek through September," he said. "And then I'm going back to Cheyenne to file the survey. And then," he paused. He was not a man who left things imprecise when precision was available. "And then I intend to come back." She held his gaze. The gray eyes were steady. "That's a plan," she said. "It's more than a plan," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I've spent a long time doing work I'm good at in places that were temporary. I'm tired of temporary." He looked at her with the amber eyes that were entirely decided and entirely warm. "You're not temporary." Clara Voss, who had been running the Harlan Creek telegraph office alone for 5 years, and riding through storms in the dark and outscoring men from Laramie, and declining proposals from men who were too little for the space she occupied, looked at John Marsh in the Wyoming morning, with the altitude around them, and the wind moving over the high grass and the mountains beyond all of it, permanent and entirely sure of themselves. She had known the shape of a thing for a long time without being able to name it. She could name it now. "Ask me," she said. He asked her. She said yes. They were married in July, in the practical way of people who understand what they're doing and need no ceremony beyond the thing itself. The service was short. The important part happened, and the unnecessary parts didn't. Harlan Creek attended in its entirety. Because Harlan Creek always attended weddings, and because there was an additional quality of interest in attending the wedding of a woman the town had privately concluded was beyond the reach of ordinary happiness. "Mrs. Calloway brought preserves," the hotel owner cried, which she denied. Frances Albright sat in the back and was gracious in the way that people are gracious when they have been wrong about something and have sufficient character to accept it without making it a scene. Marsh's survey team attended to a man, standing in a row at the back in their field coats, looking like people who had found the ceremony more moving than they'd expected. Albright, the assessor, and Peterson from the grain operation were not present. They were elsewhere, which was where they belonged. Clara's mother sat in the front row and watched her daughter with the expression of a woman who has waited for a thing for a long time and is watching it arrive and finds that it has arrived correctly. John Marsh completed the survey in the first week of September, filed it in Cheyenne, and was back in Harlan Creek by the 15th. He had told Clara he would come back. He was a precise man. He came back. He set up a private survey practice in the territory. Work that was plentiful given how much of Wyoming was still unmapped and how few people could do the work at the level the federal office required. It turned out that having a wife who could transmit and receive at the speed Clara Voss operated was, for a working surveyor, an extraordinary practical advantage. And he told her so, which she received as both a compliment and an accurate assessment. Clara ran the Harlan Creek telegraph office and the Marsh household accounts, which she had taken over within the first month of marriage because Marsh was excellent at spatial measurement and less naturally inclined toward financial record-keeping, and because Clara had taught herself bookkeeping at 20 from a manual she had ordered from a publisher in St. Louis, and she saw no reason the skill should go unused. She rode Alice on Saturday mornings. The mare had been purchased outright at the end of the survey contract, a transaction Marsh had arranged before he left for Cheyenne, quietly and without announcement, so that when Clara came down on the first Saturday after his departure, the mare was in the small stable behind the telegraph office with her name on the stall and a note that said only, "She fits, she's yours." This became known in Harlan Creek, and then simply accepted, and then visible only in the way that things become visible when they are right, which is to say, not remarkable anymore, simply true. The town's opinion of Clara Voss revised itself in the manner of small towns, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without any announcement that a revision had occurred. The comments shifted. They became the particular kind of comments that communities make about people who have found the right shape for their life. She was, people began to say, exactly right, which she had always been. It had taken the right man, a man who spent his life making accurate measurements of difficult terrain, to look at her clearly and say, I know exactly what I'm looking at. And I came back. Sometimes the world will measure you against a standard it made up to suit itself, and call you too much when the truth is you were simply more than it was ready for. The right person doesn't arrive to fix you. They arrive and wonder how anyone ever called it a flaw. Until then, keep riding out in the storms. Keep solving the problem. You were always enough. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a little entertainment and, hopefully, one small piece of warmth to carry into your day.